In this world, power is not earned. It is inherited. It is written into the soul before a child even takes its first breath. From the moment life begins, every living being in the Etherian continent is marked by what they call the soul crystal, an ethereal gemstone embedded deep within the spiritual core of every newborn, pulsing with the light of destiny itself. When a child is born, the healers don't just check for health. They check for potential. They press a revelation stone against the infant's chest, and the soul crystal responds. It glows. It hums. It sings with color and energy, revealing the talent that the heavens have chosen to bestow upon that soul. A crimson blaze means fire affinity. A deep cerulean pulse signals water manipulation. A golden radiance whispers of holy magic, divine favor, the blessing of the gods themselves. Some crystals burn with the intensity of a star, marking children destined for greatness, future archmages, legendary knights, prophets of the divine order. Others shine more modestly, but even a faint glow is enough. Even the weakest shimmer guarantees a place in this world. Because in the Etherian continent, your soul crystal defines everything. Your education. Your social standing. Your career. Your worth as a human being. It is the foundation upon which the entire civilization is built, a rigid, unforgiving hierarchy of talent, where those born with powerful affinities sit atop gilded thrones. And those born with lesser gifts spend their lives looking upward, hoping, striving, dreaming of reaching heights that were decided for them before they could even open their eyes. And then there are those born with nothing. The ones whose soul crystals don't glow. Don't hum. Don't respond at all. The ones who stare into the revelation stone and see only darkness reflected back at them, an abyss where potential should be, a void where destiny should have written its name. These wretched souls are called hollows. And in a world that worships talent like a religion, being a hollow is worse than being dead. It is being invisible. It is being erased from the story of existence before you even have a chance to write a single word. On the night Kael Ashbourne was born, the skies above the capital city of Verandaz crackled with a winter storm. Thunder rolled across the heavens like the drumbeat of an angry god. Lightning split the darkness in jagged, furious streaks. Inside the grand Ashbourne estate, one of the most prestigious noble houses in the kingdom, Lady Muriel Ashbourne screamed through the final moments of labor. Surrounded by the finest healers money and influence could buy. Lord Roderick Ashbourne paced outside the chamber doors, his jaw tight, his eyes sharp with anticipation. The Ashbourne bloodline was legendary. For 12 generations, every child born into this family had carried an extraordinary talent. Fire sorcerers. Blade saints. Runic architects. The family's legacy was etched into the very history of the kingdom, and tonight, Roderick expected nothing less than another prodigy to add to that legacy. The baby came into the world screaming. Healthy. Strong lungs. 10 fingers. 10 toes. A perfectly formed boy with dark hair and pale gray eyes that seemed to catch the candlelight like shards of broken glass. The healers smiled. Lady Muriel wept with exhaustion and joy. Lord Roderick entered the room and looked down at his son with the kind of pride that only a man who sees his own immortality reflected in a newborn's face can feel. And then they brought the revelation stone. The head healer, an elderly woman with decades of experience, pressed the smooth, luminous crystal against the infant's chest and closed her eyes, channeling the ancient diagnostic magic that would read the soul crystal's resonance. The room held its breath. Roderick leaned forward. Muriel clutched the sheets. The candles flickered. Nothing happened. The revelation stone remained cold. Dark. Silent. No glow. No hum. No resonance whatsoever. The healer frowned, adjusted her grip, and tried again. She poured more mana into the diagnostic spell, widening the scan, deepening the probe. Still nothing. The stone sat in her hands like a dead rock, lifeless and unresponsive. The healer's face drained of color. She looked up at Lord Roderick, and the words that left her mouth shattered the room like a hammer through stained glass. My lord, the child's soul crystal, it's empty. Completely empty. There is no talent. No affinity. No latent potential of any kind. He is a hollow. Silence. Absolute, crushing silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room, it buries it. Lady Muriel's lips parted, but no sound came. Lord Roderick stared at the healer as if she had spoken in a language he didn't understand. Then his eyes moved to the baby. His son. This tiny, screaming, helpless creature that was supposed to carry the Ashbourne name into the next generation. And in those cold, aristocratic eyes, something shifted. Something hardened. Something died. Test him again, Roderick commanded, his voice like iron dragged across stone. They tested him again. And again. And once more after that, with a different stone, a different healer, a different method. The result was always the same. 0. Absolute, undeniable, catastrophic 0. The boy was hollow. Empty. A vessel with no contents. A sword with no blade. A torch with no flame. Within a week, the whispers had spread through the noble district like a plague. The great Ashbourne family, paragons of talent, pillars of the kingdom, had produced a hollow. The shame was unimaginable. The political damage was incalculable. Rival houses whispered behind silk fans and jeweled goblets, their laughter barely concealed. The Ashbourne bloodline, tainted. The Ashbourne legacy, broken. All because of one empty child. Lord Roderick made his decision with the cold efficiency of a man who had long ago learned to amputate weakness before it could spread. The boy was removed from the family registry. His name was struck from the Ashbourne records. No announcement was made. No funeral was held. He was simply erased. Handed to a servant under cover of darkness and delivered to the lower ward, the slums of Verandaz, where the forgotten, the broken, and the worthless scraped out whatever miserable existence the capital's gutters could provide. Lady Muriel protested. She wept. She begged. But in a world where talent was everything, even a mother's love could not outweigh the weight of 0. Roderick silenced her with a single sentence that would haunt the walls of that estate for years to come. That thing is not my son. A hollow has no place in this house. A hollow has no place anywhere. And so Cale Ashbourne, nameless, abandoned, forgotten, began his life in the darkest corner of the world that had already decided he was nothing. The lower ward was not a place where children grew. It was a place where children survived, if they were lucky, and disappeared, if they were not. The streets were narrow, crooked, and perpetually damp, winding between crumbling stone buildings that leaned against each other like drunken old men. The air smelled of rot and smoke and desperation. Crime was not an exception here, it was the economy. Gangs controlled the food supply. Corrupt watchmen extorted the weak. And at the very bottom of this already sunken hierarchy were the hollows, those born without talent, without value, without hope. Cale learned to survive the way all hollows learn to survive, by becoming invisible. He ate scraps from behind taverns. He slept in drainage tunnels beneath the merchant quarter. He taught himself to move silently, to read the body language of dangerous men, to know when to run and when to freeze and when to fight with nothing but teeth and desperation. He was beaten. Regularly. By other street children who had at least minor talents, a flicker of flame, a touch of enhanced strength, and who took savage pleasure in reminding Cale of his place in the world. Look at the hollow. Can't even light a candle. Hey, empty boy, do us a favor and disappear. Nobody wants to breathe the same air as a 0. You know what they say about hollows, right? The gods forgot to finish making them. You're just leftover clay that nobody wanted to shape. The cruelty was relentless. It came from every direction, every day, every hour. And the worst part, the part that cut deeper than any fist or boot, was that some part of Cale believed it. How could he not? He had no talent. No affinity. No power. He had been tested, measured, weighed, and found to be absolutely, perfectly worthless by every metric that mattered in this world. What argument could he possibly make against the judgment of the soul crystal itself? But there was something inside Cale that refused to break. Something that no amount of starvation, no cascade of beatings, no avalanche of humiliation could extinguish. Call it stubbornness. Call it madness. Call it the desperate, irrational fire that burns in those who have nothing left to lose. Whatever it was, it sat at the center of his being like a clenched fist, tight, trembling, burning, and it whispered to him in the quietest hours of the night. When he lay curled in the darkness with bruised ribs and empty stomach. You are not nothing. You are not nothing. You are not nothing. He didn't know where the voice came from. He didn't know if it was his own mind playing tricks or some fragment of destiny that had gotten lost on its way to his soul crystal. All he knew was that he believed it. Against all evidence. Against all reason. Against the entire weight of a world that had discarded him like trash. Cale Ashbourne believed, with every fiber of his hollow soul, that he was meant for something more. And on the morning of his 16th birthday, a day that nobody knew and nobody celebrated, he made a decision that would alter the course of his life and eventually shake the very foundations of the world. He would enter the Arcanum Royal Academy. The Arcanum Royal Academy was not merely a school. It was the crucible in which the kingdom's future was forged. Nestled at the peak of Varanthos's highest hill, its white marble towers and enchanted spires gleamed like a crown upon the city's head. Every great hero, every legendary mage, every kingdom-shaking warrior of the past 3 centuries had walked through its hallowed gates. Admission was the single most coveted achievement in the kingdom, and it was determined by one thing: the entrance trial, a grueling, public examination that tested combat ability, magical talent, and survival instinct in real time. Thousands applied. Hundreds attempted. Dozens survived. And only the most talented, the most powerful, the most gifted were granted the honor of enrollment. For a hollow to even approach the registration desk was considered an insult. For a hollow to actually attempt the trial was unthinkable. Cale did it anyway. He stole a cloak. He forged a registration token using skills he'd learned from a counterfeiter in the lower ward. He kept his head down, his hood up, and his mouth shut. When the registrar asked for his soul crystal reading, Cale handed over a falsified document that listed a fabricated minor talent, just enough to avoid suspicion. Just enough to slip through the bureaucratic cracks. His heart hammered so hard he was certain the guards could hear it. But they waved him through. Just another forgettable face in a sea of hopeful applicants. The trial took place in the verdant abyss, a vast, enclosed forest habitat beneath the academy. Artificially sustained by ancient magic and populated with captured magical beasts of varying threat levels. The rules were simple. Survive for 6 hours. Defeat or evade the creatures within. Reach the extraction point at the center of the forest. Those who made it would be ranked and admitted based on their performance. Those who didn't, well, the academy healers were stationed outside for a reason. Cale had no skills. No magic. No weapons beyond a rusted short sword he'd stolen from a guard post. He entered the verdant abyss with nothing but his wits, his desperation, and that burning, stubborn fire in his chest that refused to die. The first 2 hours were pure horror. The forest was alive with danger, shadow wolves prowling between the trees, venomous thornback serpents coiled beneath the underbrush. Territorial stoneback apes that could crush a man's skull with a single blow. Cale ran. He hid. He climbed trees and held his breath and pressed himself into muddy hollows while beasts twice his size sniffed the air inches from his face. Every muscle in his body screamed. Every instinct told him to turn back, to flee, to accept what the world had already decided. But he didn't. He kept moving. Kept pushing. Kept surviving. And then, in the 4th hour, his luck ran out. The beast came from nowhere, a rank sea ironmane lion, a massive predatory creature with fur that gleamed like burnished metal and claws that could shred steel plate armor. It crashed through the undergrowth with a roar that shook the canopy, its eyes locked onto Cale with predatory intelligence. Cale ran. The lion was faster. He dodged left. The lion anticipated it. He threw himself behind a boulder. The lion shattered it with a single swipe. The impact sent Cale tumbling across the forest floor, his stolen sword clattering away, his body slamming against a tree trunk with enough force to crack ribs. He lay there, gasping, bleeding, staring up at the canopy as the ironmane lion stalked toward him. Its breath was hot and rank. Its eyes glowed with feral hunger. Cale could see his own reflection in those golden irises, small, broken, helpless. Empty. This is it, he thought. This is where the hollow boy dies. Alone. Forgotten. Just like everyone always said. The lion lunged. And something inside Kale opened. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a decision. It was deeper than that, more primal, more fundamental, like a door that had been sealed since before time began, suddenly swinging wide on ancient hinges. Kale felt it in the center of his chest, in the exact place where his soul crystal sat, empty and dark. Except it wasn't empty anymore. Something was there. Something vast. Something hungry. A void. Black. Absolute. Infinite. Not the absence of power, the absence of everything. A consuming emptiness that pulled at the fabric of reality itself like a wound in the universe. And as the iron mane lion's claws descended toward Kale's chest, his right hand shot up, not by conscious choice, but by instinct so deep it predated language, predated thought, predated civilization, and his palm connected with the beast's massive head. The void surged. What happened next defied every known law of magic, every principle taught in every academy across the continent. A swirling darkness erupted from Kale's palm, spreading across the lion's body like living shadow. The beast roared, not in anger, but in agony, in confusion, in primal, existential terror. Something was being pulled out of it. Not blood. Not mana. Something deeper. Something fundamental. Its skill. Its innate ability, the talent written into its very being, the thing that made an iron mane lion what it was. Iron hide. The passive defensive skill that hardened the creature's fur and skin to the density of forged metal. The ability that made iron mane lions nearly impervious to physical attacks. It was being ripped from the beast's soul like thread from a tapestry, unraveling, dissolving, flowing through the darkness and into Kale's palm, into his body. Into that impossible void where his empty soul crystal had sat dormant for 16 years. The lion collapsed. Its metallic fur dulled. Its body weakened. It twitched once, twice, and then lay still, not dead, but diminished. Reduced. Stripped of the very thing that defined it. And Kale lay beneath it, his hand still pressed against its skull. His eyes wide with shock as he felt something settle into his core like a key sliding into a lock that had waited an eternity for this exact moment. Iron hide. Skill acquired. Integration complete. He could feel it. Not just as knowledge, but as part of himself, woven into his muscles, his bones, his skin. He flexed his fingers and watched as a faint metallic sheen rippled across his forearm, there and gone in an instant. His skin had hardened. Just for a moment. Just enough. Kale stared at his trembling hand. His breath came in ragged, disbelieving gasps. His mind raced, stumbled, crashed against the impossibility of what had just happened, and then slowly, painfully, began to reassemble itself around a single, earth-shattering realization. He had no talent. That was still true. His soul crystal was still empty. But that emptiness, that void that the world had called his greatest shame, it wasn't a curse. It was a mouth. A hunger. An abyss that could reach into the souls of others and take what they had. Not copy. Not mimic. Take. Devour. Make their power his own. He didn't need to be born with talent. He could devour every skill in existence. A laugh escaped his lips, broken, breathless, half-mad with the weight of what he'd just discovered. The boy who was born with nothing had just stumbled upon the most terrifying ability the world had ever seen. He rose to his feet. Bruised. Bleeding. Grinning. The remaining 2 hours of the trial were a blur. Kale moved differently now. Not just with the desperate urgency of a survivor, but with the quiet, predatory focus of someone who had tasted power for the first time and understood, truly understood, that the rules of this world no longer applied to him. He didn't engage every beast he encountered. He was strategic. Careful. He was still weak, still injured, still running on fumes and adrenaline. But the iron hide skill gave him just enough durability to take hits that should have killed him and keep moving. He reached the extraction point with 11 minutes to spare. When he emerged from the verdant abyss, battered, blood-soaked. Barely standing, the examiners stared at him with expressions that ranged from disbelief to suspicion to something that might have been fear. Their monitoring crystals had recorded fragments of his fight with the Iron Mane Lion, but the footage was corrupted, distorted by the void's energy. leaving only shadows and static where the crucial moment should have been. "How did you survive?" the head examiner demanded, studying the rusted sword and empty-handed boy before her. "Your registration lists a minor talent. But nothing in your performance matches any known skill classification." Kale met her eyes. "I got lucky," he said quietly. The examiner didn't believe him. He could see it in the tightness of her jaw, the narrowing of her eyes. But the rules were clear. He had survived the trial. He had reached the extraction point. By every measurable standard, he had passed. They admitted him. Reluctantly. Suspiciously. With barely concealed disdain. He was placed in Class F, the lowest tier, the bottom rung, the class reserved for students with the weakest talents and the most forgettable futures. His official ranking was dead last. Seat 1 of Class F. The lowest-ranked student in the entire history of the Arcanum Royal Academy. As Kale walked through the academy gates for the first time, he felt the weight of 1,000 stares pressing down on him. Students in pristine uniforms glanced his way and immediately looked past him, dismissing him as unworthy of even curiosity. Instructors marked their rosters with his name and sighed. The grand marble halls, the enchanted libraries, the towering statues of legendary alumni, all of it seemed to whisper the same message. You don't belong here. You are nothing. You are empty. But for the first time in his life, Kale didn't flinch. Because now he knew something that none of them did. Now he carried a secret in the palm of his hand and a void in his soul that hungered for everything this world had to offer. He looked up at the Academy's central tower, that gleaming spire where the S-class elite trained, where the kingdom's future legends were forged, and he made a silent promise. Not to the world. Not to the gods. Not to the family that had thrown him away like garbage. To himself. I will stand at the top. And I will devour every single thing that stands in my way. The gates of the Arcanum Royal Academy closed behind him. And somewhere deep within his chest, in the place where his empty soul crystal sat like a black hole waiting to be fed, the void pulsed. Hungry. Patient. Ready. The Arcanum Royal Academy was not simply a school. It was a kingdom unto itself, a sprawling, magnificent fortress of knowledge, power, and ambition that occupied the entire summit of Celestia Hill, the highest point in the capital city of Verandaz. Its architecture was a testament to centuries of accumulated wealth and magical mastery, soaring towers of white marble laced with veins of crystallized mana that pulsed with soft blue light. Sprawling courtyards paved with enchanted stone that adjusted temperature based on the season, libraries that stretched deeper underground than the towers rose above. And training halls reinforced with barrier magic so powerful that even a full-powered dragon's breath couldn't crack their walls. Floating walkways connected the upper towers, drifting lazily through the air like stone clouds, ferrying students between classes with effortless magical precision. Enchanted fountains in the central plaza projected real-time rankings of every student, their names, their classes, their positions, in shimmering golden text that hung in the air for all to see. It was beautiful. It was awe-inspiring. And it was, beneath every polished surface and gleaming enchantment, absolutely ruthless. Because the Arcanum Royal Academy did not believe in equality. It believed in hierarchy. It believed in talent. It believed, with the unwavering conviction of an institution that had operated for over 300 years, that a person's worth was determined at birth, refined through competition, and displayed for the world to judge. And the mechanism through which this belief was enforced was the ranking system, the single most important structure in the academy, more important than any curriculum, any instructor, any graduation certificate. Every student admitted to the academy was assigned a class based on their entrance trial performance and soul crystal evaluation. Class S at the top, the untouchable elite, prodigies whose talents blazed with the intensity of small suns. Below them, Class A, then B, then C, each tier representing a measurable step down in power, potential, and social standing. And at the very bottom, buried beneath layers of contempt and institutional neglect, sat Class F, the failures, the leftovers, the students whose talents were so minor, so insignificant, that the academy barely acknowledged their existence. But the ranking system wasn't static. That was the cruel genius of it. Students could challenge those above them to formal duels, regulated, sanctioned combat encounters witnessed by instructors and peers, and if they won, they swapped positions. Rise or fall. Climb or sink. The strong ascended. The weak descended. And those at the very bottom. They didn't just suffer socially. They suffered materially. Class F students received the worst dormitories, the oldest textbooks, the most limited access to training facilities and magical resources. They ate in a separate, smaller dining hall. They wore uniforms with a visible gray stripe on the collar, a mark of their station that might as well have been a brand burned into their skin. And perhaps worst of all, Class F students were expected, not officially required, but culturally compelled through years of unchallenged tradition, to serve the higher-ranked students. Carrying bags. Running errands. Cleaning equipment after training sessions. It was hazing dressed in the language of character building, and everyone from the headmaster to the newest instructor turned a blind eye because, in a world built on talent, those without it were simply expected to kneel. This was the world Cale Ashbourne walked into on his first morning as a student. Class F, Seat 1. The absolute bottom. The lowest-ranked student in the entire history of the Arcanum Royal Academy. His dormitory was a narrow, damp room in the basement level of the eastern wing, a section of the academy so neglected that the enchanted lighting had failed years ago and never been repaired. The walls were bare stone, slick with condensation. The bed was a wooden frame with a thin, straw-stuffed mattress that smelled of mildew. There was no desk, no wardrobe, no window. Just four walls, a door that didn't lock properly, and the faint sound of water dripping somewhere behind the stone. Cale set down his single bag of belongings, a stolen cloak, a change of clothes, a half-eaten bread roll, and looked around the room with an expression that might have been despair on anyone else's face. On his, it was something harder. Something quieter. He'd slept in worse places. Drainage tunnels. Alley corners. The crawlspace beneath a butcher's shop where the rats were bold enough to bite. This room had walls. A ceiling. A door that at least partially closed. By lower ward standards, it was practically a palace. He sat on the edge of the bed and pressed his right hand against his chest, against the place where his soul crystal sat, empty and dark, like a hole in the fabric of his being. Except it wasn't entirely empty anymore, was it? Iron hide still thrummed faintly within him, woven into his muscles and bones like a second skeleton. The void was there too, that vast, hungry darkness that had erupted during the trial and devoured the Iron Mane Lion's skill with terrifying efficiency. He could still feel it pulsing beneath his skin, patient and waiting, like a predator crouched in tall grass. He flexed his fingers. A faint metallic sheen rippled across his knuckles and disappeared. He had power now. Real power. But he also had questions, dangerous, urgent questions that he couldn't afford to answer carelessly. What exactly was this ability? How far did it extend? What were its limits? And most importantly, could anyone else sense it? He needed to be careful. In a school full of prodigies and magical censors, one wrong move could expose him. And a hollow with an unknown, unclassified ability that could steal the skills of others. That wasn't a student. That was a threat. The kind of threat that institutions like this didn't study, they eliminated. So Cale made a decision in that damp, dark room, sitting on a bed that smelled like mildew in a basement that the academy had forgotten. He would hide. He would endure. He would learn. And when the time was right, when he understood the full scope of what he was, he would rise so fast and so far that by the time they realized what was happening, it would already be too late to stop him. The first week was an exercise in humiliation. Cale attended classes with the other Class F students, a motley collection of the weak, the unlucky, and the broken. Their instructor, a bored middle-aged mage named Professor Harden who had clearly been assigned to Class F as a punishment, taught with the enthusiasm of a man counting down the days to retirement. The curriculum was basic to the point of insult: elementary mana theory, introductory combat forms, fundamental beast identification. Material that Class A students had mastered before they were 12. But the real education happened outside the classroom. It started on the second day, when Cale was walking through the main courtyard toward the eastern dining hall. A group of Class B students, 4 of them, uniformed and sneering, stepped into his path with the casual arrogance of people who had never once been told no. "Hey. You're the Hollow, right?" The speaker was a tall boy with sharp features and a wind affinity crest embroidered on his collar. He looked at Kale the way a person might look at an insect that had landed on their dinner plate. Class F, Seat 1. I saw your name on the rankings. Dead last. That's actually impressive, in a pathetic sort of way. Kale kept his expression neutral. I'm just trying to get to the dining hall. Dining hall. The boy laughed, and his friends laughed with him, synchronized, performative. The laughter of people who had learned cruelty as a social skill. Class F eats after everyone else, hollow. And before you eat, you carry. He shoved a heavy canvas bag into Kale's arms, training equipment, by the weight and the metallic clinking inside. Take this to Training Hall 7. Don't drop it, don't open it, and don't take too long. I have a session in 20 minutes. Kale looked at the bag. Then at the boy. His fingers twitched. The void stirred in his chest, hungry and curious, as if sensing the wind affinity pulsing through the boy's soul and wondering what it would taste like. No. Not yet. Not here. He took the bag and walked away without a word. The incidents multiplied. By the end of the first week, Kale had been forced to carry equipment for upper-class students 6 times, had his food knocked out of his hands twice, and had been tripped in a hallway by someone he never even saw. The gray stripe on his collar was a target, and the academy's culture of casual cruelty ensured that there was never a shortage of people willing to take aim. But the worst encounter, the one that burned itself into Kale's memory like a brand, came on the 7th day, in the central courtyard, in front of half the student body. His name was Dorian Velcrest. Even before Kale saw him, he felt him. A wave of heat that pressed against the skin like standing too close to a furnace. A pressure in the air that made breathing feel like an act of defiance. Dorian Velcrest didn't walk, he arrived, surrounded by an entourage of sycophants and admirers who orbited him like lesser planets around a star. He was tall, golden-haired, and devastatingly handsome in the way that only those blessed by both genetics and divine talent could be. His uniform was custom-tailored, its collar bearing the crimson crest of the Velcrest ducal house. The most powerful noble family in the kingdom, second only to the royal family itself. His soul crystal blazed with S-class fire affinity, and at 17 years old, he was already considered the strongest student in the academy's current generation. Prodigy. Genius. Future archmage. The golden boy of a golden bloodline, and he wore his superiority like a second skin, effortlessly, arrogantly, as if the entire world existed solely to confirm what he already knew about himself. He noticed Kale the way a lion notices a mouse crossing its path, not with concern, but with a kind of bored, predatory amusement. Stop. The single word froze the courtyard. Students who had been chatting, laughing, moving between classes, all of them went still, turning to watch with the eager, hungry attention of spectators who could smell blood in the air. Dorian descended the courtyard steps and stopped 3 paces in front of Kale, looking down at him with eyes that burned like molten gold. His lips curved into a smile that contained no warmth whatsoever. So you're the hollow. He said the word like it tasted interesting, not bitter, not sweet, but novel, like a flavor he'd never encountered and wasn't sure he liked. I heard about you. The boy born with 0 talent who somehow stumbled through the entrance trial. The academy's little charity case. Kale met his gaze. Said nothing. Dorian tilted his head. I'm talking to you, empty boy. I heard you. A ripple of shock moved through the watching crowd. Class F students didn't talk back. Hollows especially didn't talk back. And absolutely nobody talked back to Dorian Velcrest. The golden boy's smile didn't falter, but something shifted behind those burning eyes, a flicker of interest, perhaps, or irritation, or both. Brave, Dorian murmured. Or stupid. With hollows, it's usually the latter. He raised one hand, casually, almost lazily, and a ball of white-hot flame materialized above his palm. The heat was immediate and intense, students nearby stepped back instinctively, shielding their faces. The fire burned with such concentrated power that the marble floor beneath it began to discolor, hairline cracks spreading from the heat. Do you know what this is, hollow? This is what talent looks like. This is what the gods chose to give me. And do you know what they gave you? He leaned in, close enough that Kale could feel the fire's heat against his cheek like a slap. Nothing. They gave you absolutely nothing. You're a blank page in a library full of masterpieces. You don't belong here. You don't belong anywhere. He extinguished the flame with a snap of his fingers and turned away, already bored, already moving on to more interesting things. But as he walked, he called over his shoulder, loud enough for the entire courtyard to hear, "Someone put the hollow to work. He's making the courtyard look untidy." Laughter. From every direction. Warm, careless, brutal laughter that washed over Kale like a wave of acid. He stood there in the center of it, motionless, expressionless, feeling the void in his chest pulse with a fury so intense it took every ounce of his willpower to keep it contained. Not yet. Not here. Not now. But soon, Dorian Velcrest. Very, very soon. That night, after the dormitory halls fell silent and the enchanted patrols shifted to the outer walls, Kale slipped out of his basement room and descended into the one place in the academy where no one would think to look for a Class F student. The underground training dungeon. Every major academy in the kingdom maintained one, a controlled subterranean environment stocked with captured magical beasts. Designed for advanced students to practice combat skills in a semi-realistic setting. The Arcanum's dungeon was particularly vast, spanning 7 sub-levels of increasing difficulty. Each populated with creatures ranging from minor threat beasts on the upper floors to genuinely dangerous monsters in the depths. Access was restricted to Class B and above, monitored by enchanted gates that required a specific mana signature to open. Kale didn't have the right mana signature. He didn't have any mana signature. But what he did have was 16 years of experience breaking into places he wasn't supposed to be, and the Academy security, for all its magical sophistication, had a very human flaw. It was designed to keep out people with detectable power. A hollow, someone whose soul crystal registered as completely empty, was invisible to mana-based detection systems. He was a blind spot in the Academy's defenses. A ghost walking through walls that didn't know he existed. He found an maintenance access tunnel behind the eastern kitchens, followed it down through 3 levels of service corridors, and emerged into the first sub-level of the dungeon through a ventilation grate that hadn't been inspected in years. The dungeon was dark, humid, and alive with the sounds of captive beasts, growls and hisses and the scrape of claws against stone echoing through the labyrinthine passages. Enchanted barriers divided the space into containment zones, each housing a different species. The first sub-level was the weakest: shadow hares, thornback lizards, mana beetles, creatures that posed minimal threat to any trained combatant. Perfect. Kale approached the first containment zone, a sealed chamber housing a pair of shadow hares, small, quick creatures with jet black fur and the innate ability to move in short-range teleportation bursts. Shadow Step, a basic evasion skill, but one that could mean the difference between life and death in combat. He opened the containment barrier. The lock was mechanical, not magical, because why would you waste enchantments on the weakest beasts? And stepped inside. The hares sensed him immediately. They froze, ears flat, red eyes gleaming in the darkness. Then they bolted, blinking in and out of visibility as they shadow-stepped around the chamber in panic. Kale moved carefully. Patiently. He cornered one against the far wall, crouching low, extending his right hand slowly, the way you'd approach a frightened animal. The void stirred in his chest. He could feel it reaching outward through his palm, hungry, eager, straining toward the creature's soul like a magnet drawn to iron. His fingers brushed the hare's fur. The void surged. It was faster this time, smoother, more controlled, as if the ability was learning alongside him. The familiar darkness spread from his palm, enveloped the creature, and pulled. The hare convulsed, let out a thin, keening cry, and then went limp. Not dead, Kale checked quickly, pressing his ear to its chest. Still breathing. Still alive. But when it opened its eyes and tried to run, it moved normally. No teleportation. No blinking. The shadow step was gone, ripped from its being like a page torn from a book. And now it was his. Shadow step. Skill acquired. Kale felt it integrate into his body, not just as knowledge, but as instinct, as reflex. He thought about moving, and suddenly he was 3 feet to the left, the world blurring for a fraction of a second as space folded around him. He stumbled, caught himself, and breathed hard. It worked. It actually worked. Over the next several nights, Kale returned to the dungeon again and again, working his way through the first sub-level's containment zones with methodical precision. Each visit, he targeted a different creature. Each visit, he devoured a different skill. From a mana beetle, a crystalline insect that could sense magical energy through solid walls, he absorbed mana sense, gaining the ability to perceive the flow and concentration of mana in his environment. Suddenly, the academy transformed before his eyes. He could see the mana currents flowing through the walls, the enchantments pulsing in the floors, and most importantly, the blazing cores of power that burned inside every talented student he passed. Each person was a bonfire, each soul crystal a beacon of energy that his new sense could read like a map. From a Duskfang stalker, a lean, predatory beast that hunted in absolute darkness, he devoured predators' reflexes, a passive enhancement that dramatically sharpened his reaction time, spatial awareness, and sensory processing. His body became faster without becoming stronger, not in raw speed, but in the ability to perceive, process, and react to threats with inhuman efficiency. 3 skills. 3 nights. 3 stolen powers that no hollow should possess. And with each absorption, Kale learned more about the terrifying rules of his ability. The Devour was absolute. Once he took a skill, the original wielder lost it permanently. There was no sharing, no copying, no temporary transfer. The skill was ripped from the target's soul and integrated into the void within his own. The process required physical contact, skin to skin, or close enough. And the target had to be alive or very recently deceased, within minutes, at most. Dead souls held nothing for the void to grab. He also discovered something that chilled him to the bone. The void didn't just accept the skills passively. It hungered for them. Each time he absorbed a new ability, the void grew slightly, not in size, exactly, but in appetite. It wanted more. It whispered to him in sensations rather than words, a constant low pull toward every source of power he encountered. Walking through the academy corridors, surrounded by hundreds of talented students, was like walking through a feast while starving. The void reached toward every soul crystal it sensed, straining at the edges of Kale's control, wanting to touch, to taste, to take. He had to be careful. He had to maintain absolute control. Because if the void ever slipped its leash, if it ever activated without his conscious intent, the consequences would be catastrophic. Not just for him. For whoever he happened to be touching at that moment. A handshake. A bump in the hallway. A casual brush of shoulders in a crowded corridor. Any of those could become a theft, an irreversible robbery of someone's talent, their identity, their very self. The thought terrified him. But it also focused him. Control. Discipline. Precision. These were the tools he needed to master before anything else. The void was a weapon. The most powerful weapon he had ever encountered. But a weapon without control was just a disaster waiting to happen. It was during his 4th nighttime expedition into the dungeon that Kale encountered someone unexpected. He was crouched in the shadows of the 2nd sub-level corridor, deeper than he'd gone before. Where the beasts were stronger and the containment barriers hummed with actual magical reinforcement, when a soft voice spoke from directly behind him. You know, for someone who's supposed to be a talentless hollow, you move awfully well in the dark. Kale spun, shadow stepping instinctively 3 feet backward. His body dropping into a defensive crouch. His mana sense flared outward, scanning the darkness, and found a single figure leaning against the corridor wall with the casual posture of someone who had been watching for a while. She was about his age, slender and pale, with long silver-white hair that seemed to glow faintly in the dungeon's dim light. Her eyes were striking, a deep, unsettling violet that seemed to pulse with an inner luminescence, like windows into something otherworldly. She wore the academy uniform, but her collar bore a mark that Kale hadn't seen on anyone else, a black crescent moon, embroidered over the standard class insignia. Relax, she said, raising both hands in a gesture of peace. If I wanted to report you, I would have done it 3 nights ago, when I first noticed you sneaking down here. Kale's jaw tightened. You've been watching me for 3 nights. Watching is a strong word. Noticing. I come down here too, for my own reasons. You're not the only student who finds the upper floors suffocating. She pushed off the wall and extended a hand. Sarah Nightbloom. Class F, Seat 3. Healer Specialization. Cursed bloodline. Social pariah. I think we have a lot in common. Kale stared at her hand, acutely aware of the void stirring in his chest, reaching toward the mana signature he could sense pulsing through her palm. He kept his own hands at his sides. I don't shake hands, he said carefully. Sarah studied him for a moment, then lowered her hand with a knowing smile. Fair enough. Everyone has their boundaries. Over the next hour, sitting in the relative safety of a cleared containment zone, Sarah explained her story. The Nightbloom family carried what was known as a cursed bloodline, a hereditary condition where the healer's restorative magic was intertwined with a corrosive, necrotic energy that could decay living tissue as easily as it could restore it. Sarah was an extraordinarily talented healer, class of potential, by every measurable standard. But her cursed blood meant that her touch carried a constant risk. Healing someone meant exposing them to traces of necrotic energy. Extended contact could cause cellular degradation. And if she ever lost control, her power could kill instead of cure. The Academy had admitted her because her talent was too rare to ignore, but they had immediately dumped her in Class F and quietly instructed other students to keep their distance. The black crescent on her collar was the curse mark, a visible warning that identified her as biologically dangerous. So you see, Sarah concluded, her voice carrying the particular lightness of someone who had long ago learned to wrap their pain in humor, we're both monsters in their eyes. You're empty. I'm toxic. Between the two of us, we've got the full spectrum of unwanted covered. Despite himself, Kale felt the corner of his mouth twitch. It wasn't a smile. Not quite. But it was closer than anything his face had produced in years. The third member of their unlikely alliance appeared 2 days later. Rook was impossible to miss. 7 feet tall, broad-shouldered, covered in a fine layer of tawny fur with sharp, leonine features and cat-slit amber eyes, he was a beastkin. A member of the non-human races that existed alongside humanity in the Etherian continent but were rarely welcomed in its institutions. His talent was genuine and formidable, an innate swordsmanship instinct so refined that he'd earned a Class B ranking on entrance. But within 2 weeks, he'd been demoted to Class F after a confrontation with a corrupt combat instructor who had ordered him to throw a duel against a noble student. Rook had refused. The instructor had fabricated a disciplinary charge. The Academy had sided with the instructor. Because of course it had. Kale found him in the Class F dining hall, a cramped, poorly lit room that smelled of boiled cabbage and institutional apathy, eating alone at a corner table. His massive frame hunched over a tray of food that looked barely sufficient for someone half his size. You're the Hollow, Rook said without looking up. His voice was deep, rumbling, like gravel tumbling down a hillside. And you're the beastkin who told an instructor to go to hell. Rook snorted. I told him to go somewhere worse than hell. That's why they added the extra demerit. He finally looked up, and his amber eyes studied Kale with an animal's instinctive assessment, not hostile, but evaluating. Measuring. After a long moment, he grunted. You move wrong. Wrong how? Wrong for a Hollow. Wrong for someone with zero talent. Your weight distribution when you walk. Your eye tracking patterns. Your reflexes when that Class B idiot bumped you in the hallway yesterday. You shifted your center of gravity before contact, not after. That's trained response. Combat response. Hollows don't move like that. He took a slow bite of bread. So either you're not really a Hollow, or you're something nobody's seen before. Kale held Rook's gaze for a long, quiet moment. Does it matter? Rook considered this. Then a slow, fanged grin spread across his leonine face. Not to me, it doesn't. I stopped caring about what the system says people are a long time ago. He pushed a second tray across the table, one he'd apparently acquired just for this purpose. Sit down. Eat. You look like a stiff wind could break you in half. 3 outcasts. 3 rejects. 1 empty boy, 1 cursed healer, 1 defiant beastkin. It wasn't friendship, not yet. It was something rawer, more practical, more honest. It was the recognition that in a world designed to crush people like them, standing alone was a luxury none of them could afford. 3 weeks passed. Kale continued his secret dungeon expeditions, his growing arsenal of devoured skills hidden beneath the mask of a helpless Hollow. He trained with Rook in empty courtyards after dark, learning swordsmanship fundamentals from the beastkin's seemingly endless combat knowledge. He studied with Sarah in the restricted medical archives, where her cursed bloodline gave her access to texts about rare soul conditions, texts that might, she theorized, contain information about whatever anomaly lived inside Kale's empty soul crystal. And then the ranking duel happened. It was engineered. Kale knew at the moment the challenge was issued. The challenger was a Class C wind mage named Varen Coles, lean, sharp-featured, with the particular cruelty of a natural-born bully who happened to possess real power. He was also, as Kale's mana sense quickly confirmed, one of Dorian Velcrest's inner circle, a lackey, a follower, a dog sent to do his master's bidding. I, Varen Coles, Class C Seat 7, formally challenge Kale Ashbourne, Class F Seat 1, to a ranking duel under Academy Regulation 14b. Varen announced this in the central courtyard, during the busiest hour of the day, ensuring maximum audience. His smile was sharp and anticipatory. Unless the Hollow would prefer to forfeit and publicly acknowledge his place at the bottom where he belongs. The crowd gathered instantly. Hundreds of students. Dozens of instructors. And there, watching from the elevated terrace above the courtyard with a golden goblet of something expensive in his hand, Dorian Velcrest, his molten eyes fixed on Kale with an expression of lazy, satisfied amusement. This was a message. Not just from Varen, but from Dorian. Know your place. Stay down. Or be put down. Kale looked at Varen. Then up at Dorian. Then back to Varen. I accept, he said. The duel took place in Arena 3, a circular combat platform surrounded by tiered seating that filled to capacity within minutes. The rules were standard: no killing, no permanent maiming, fight until surrender or incapacitation. An instructor served as referee. Medical staff stood ready. Everything was proper, regulated, civilized. A thin veneer of order over what was fundamentally a blood sport. Varen took his position on the opposite side of the arena, wind already swirling around his forearms, his confidence radiating like heat from a bonfire. He was genuinely strong. Class C wasn't a joke. His wind magic could generate cutting gales, defensive barriers, and high-speed movement enhancement. Against a Hollow with no abilities, this wasn't a duel. It was an execution. Sarah gripped the railing of the spectator section, her violet eyes wide with barely contained anxiety. Beside her, Rook leaned back with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He's going to get killed, Sarah whispered. Rook said nothing. His amber eyes were fixed on Kale with an intensity that suggested he was seeing something others couldn't. The referee raised his hand. Begin. Varen struck first, a lance of compressed wind that crossed the arena in a heartbeat, aimed at Kale's center mass. Fast. Precise. Powerful enough to shatter ribs and send a normal person flying. Kale's shadow stepped. The world blurred. Space folded. He was 3 feet to the right, the windland screaming past his previous position and cratering the arena wall behind him. The crowd gasped, a single, collective intake of breath that sounded like the entire arena had been punched in the stomach. Varen's confident smirk faltered. What the? Kale moved. Not like a Hollow. Not like a Class F nobody. He moved like a predator, low, fluid, explosive, his predator's reflexes processing Varen's movements in real time, reading the direction of his mana flow. He saw the next attack before Varen even launched it. Wind slash, horizontal, widespread, designed to catch a dodging opponent. Kale dropped beneath it, the cutting gale passing inches above his head, and closed the distance with another shadow step. 5 feet. 3 feet. 1 foot. Varen panicked. He threw up a wind barrier, a rotating shell of compressed air that should have repelled any physical approach with bone-breaking force. Kale hit it, felt the wind slam against his body, felt his skin bruise and his muscles strain, an iron hide activated, his body hardening to metallic density for a critical half-second. Absorbing the impact that should have launched him backward. He punched through the barrier. His fist connected with Varen's jaw, not with stolen magic, not with supernatural power, but with raw physical force backed by reflexes that could track a bullet and skin that could tank a wind blade. Varen's head snapped back. His eyes went glassy. He stumbled, tripped, and hit the arena floor with a crash that echoed through the sudden, absolute silence of the arena. The referee counted. 5 seconds. 10. Varun didn't get up. Winner, Cale Ashbourne, Class F, Seat 1. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The arena sat in a vacuum of disbelief, every face frozen in the same expression of bewildered shock. And then the whispers began, soft at first, then building, swelling, rising into a tide of confusion and fear and fascination that swept through the student body like wildfire. How did a hollow do that? Was that teleportation? Where did he learn teleportation? His skin changed, did you see? It went metallic for a second, that's not possible. Hollows can't have skills. That's the entire definition of a hollow. What is he? Up on the elevated terrace, Dorian Velcrest's golden goblet had stopped halfway to his lips. The lazy amusement was gone from his face. In its place was something new, something sharp and focused and dangerous. His molten eyes burned as they tracked Cale's movement across the arena floor, and for the first time since he'd entered the academy. Dorian Velcrest looked at a Class F student and didn't see something beneath him. He saw a threat. Down in the arena, Cale walked toward the exit without looking back. His knuckles throbbed. His body ached. The void hummed contentedly in his chest, satisfied but still hungry. Always hungry. Sarah caught him at the entrance, her expression a war between relief and terror. Cale, everyone saw that. Everyone. The instructors, the examiners, they're going to ask questions. They're going to investigate. Let them, Cale said quietly. Rook appeared beside them, his fanged grin wider than Cale had ever seen it. Well, the beastkin rumbled, clapping a massive hand on Cale's shoulder with enough force to stagger him. I'd say the hollow just made himself very, very interesting. Cale said nothing. But as he walked through the academy corridors, feeling the stares, hearing the whispers, sensing the shift in the air around him like the first tremor before an earthquake, he allowed himself one small, private thought. This is just the beginning. And deep within his chest, the void pulsed in agreement. Hungry. Growing. Waiting for more. The announcement came on a cold morning. Delivered not by an instructor but by the Academy's enchanted herald system, massive crystalline orbs mounted at every corridor intersection that projected the voice of the administration directly into the minds of every student simultaneously. There was no ignoring it. No pretending you didn't hear. The message carved itself into your consciousness like a chisel into marble, sharp and absolute and final. Attention, all enrolled students of the Arcanum Royal Academy. By decree of the Grand Academic Council, the annual Abyssal Dungeon Expedition will commence in 72 hours. Participation is mandatory. No exceptions. No deferrals. No appeals. Squad assignments will be posted at the Central Registrar by sundown. Prepare accordingly. The Academy assumes no liability for injury, psychological trauma, or death incurred during the expedition. Glory to the gifted. Strength to the worthy. That last line always struck Cale as particularly cruel. Glory to the gifted. Strength to the worthy. As if glory and worth were things you were born with, like eye color or blood type. As if they weren't earned through suffering and sacrifice and the kind of stubborn, teeth-grinding refusal to die that Cale had been practicing since the day he drew his first breath in the gutters of the lower ward. He was sitting in the back corner of the Class F common room when the announcement hit, a cramped, poorly lit space with peeling wallpaper and furniture that looked like it had been salvaged from a fire. The other Class F students reacted with predictable dread. Groans. Whispered prayers. One girl near the window actually started crying. And Cale understood their fear, because he understood what the Abyssal Dungeon really was. Beneath the Arcanum Royal Academy, carved into the bedrock of the mountain upon which the institution stood, lay one of the oldest and most dangerous magical structures on the continent, the Abyssal Labyrinth. Nobody knew who built it. Some scholars claimed it predated the Academy itself, that the school had been constructed on top of the dungeon specifically to study and contain it. Others believed it was a living organism, a sentient magical entity that fed on fear and mana and the dying screams of those foolish enough to enter its depths. What everyone agreed on was this: the labyrinth was not static. It shifted. It changed. Its corridors rearranged themselves like the coils of a sleeping serpent, and its floors, descending deeper and deeper into the earth, grew progressively more lethal with each level. The creatures that inhabited it were not ordinary beasts. They were abyssal fauna, monsters born from concentrated dark mana, twisted amalgamations of predatory instinct and magical corruption that existed solely to kill. The Academy used the first 5 floors of the labyrinth as a training ground. Every year, students were sent inside for a 48-hour survival expedition designed to test their combat readiness, their ability to function under pressure, and their capacity for teamwork in life-threatening situations. The first 3 floors were considered manageable for properly trained students. Floor 4 was dangerous. Floor 5 was where students started dying, though the Academy never publicly acknowledged the death toll, burying it instead under euphemisms like expedition attrition and acceptable training losses. Floors 6 and below were sealed permanently, warded by ancient barriers maintained by the Academy's most powerful faculty members. Because what lived below Floor 5 was not something students were meant to encounter. What lived below Floor 5 was not something most professional hunters were meant to encounter. Those depths held Rank A entities. Rank S nightmares. Things that could depopulate cities and crack continental plates if they ever reached the surface. The squad assignments were posted at sundown, exactly as promised. Students crowded around the central registrar's massive notice board, scanning for their names, their teammates, their designated entry points. The system was supposedly random, an impartial magical algorithm that sorted students into balanced squads of 6 based on complementary skills and talent levels. In theory, every squad would contain a mix of offensive, defensive, and support-oriented students. In theory, the system was fair. In practice, it was anything but. Kale found his name at the very bottom of the list. Squad 47. And the moment he read the other 5 names assigned to his group, he knew something was very, very wrong. Sarah Nightbloom, the ostracized healer with the cursed bloodline that made other students physically recoil from her presence. Rook Thalvane, the demoted beastkin swordsman who'd been exiled to Class F for insubordination. Miravas, a timid Class F enchantment student whose only ability was minor object reinforcement. Jorin Hale, a scrawny, anxious boy with a barely functional wind affinity that could produce little more than a stiff breeze. And Tessa Grynn, a quiet, withdrawn girl whose talent was classified as ambient mana sensing, an ability so passive and non-combative that it was practically useless in a fight. 6 students. Every single one of them from Class F. Every single one of them at the absolute bottom of the Academy's hierarchy. Not a single offensive powerhouse. Not a single high-ranked talent. Not a single student that the Academy would miss if they never came back. This wasn't random. This was a death sentence wrapped in bureaucratic packaging. And the man who had signed the death sentence was standing 3 floors above, watching the notice board through a scrying crystal with cold, calculating satisfaction. Vice Dean Aldros Kane, the Academy's second highest authority, a silver-haired man with the kind of polished, aristocratic face that concealed rot the way a gilded frame conceals a crumbling wall. To the public, Aldros was a paragon of academic excellence, a decorated former war mage who had devoted his twilight years to shaping the next generation. In truth, he was a puppet. A tool. A loyal servant of an organization so secret that even the kingdom's intelligence network had only scratched the surface of its existence. The Eclipse Covenant. A shadow syndicate that had woven its tendrils into every major institution on the continent, the military, the church, the noble houses, the merchant guilds, and yes, the academies. Their goals were unclear even to most of their own members, shrouded in layers of compartmentalized secrecy. But Aldros knew enough. He knew that the Covenant was interested in power, specifically, in the acquisition, study, and weaponization of unusual talents. And he knew that a boy in Class F had done something during the entrance trial that should have been impossible. Something that his monitoring crystals had captured only in fragments, distorted shadows, corrupted data. And the unmistakable energy signature of a skill being transferred from one living being to another. That boy was dangerous. That boy was an anomaly. And anomalies, in Vice Dean Aldros's experience, needed to be eliminated before they attracted the kind of attention that even the Eclipse Covenant couldn't control. Squad 47 was his solution. 6 expendable students. A dungeon that could be discreetly manipulated. And a tragic accident that no one would investigate too closely, because who mourns the deaths of Class F failures? The expedition began at dawn. 47 squads descended into the labyrinth through designated entry portals, shimmering, unstable doorways that deposited each group at different starting points across the first floor. The air inside hit Kale like a wall of damp, cold malice. It wasn't just temperature. It was atmosphere. The dungeon had a presence, a weight that pressed against the mind, whispering at the edges of perception, testing the psychological fortitude of everyone who entered. The walls were made of dark, wet stone that seemed to pulse faintly, like the interior of some colossal living thing. Bioluminescent fungi clung to the ceiling in clusters, casting everything in a sickly blue-green pallor that made shadows dance and distances deceive. Kale's squad materialized in a narrow corridor that smelled of iron and decay. Immediately, something felt wrong. The mana density was too high. The ambient pressure was too heavy. And the fungi on the ceiling weren't blue-green, they were deep violet, a coloration that Kale had read about in a stolen bestiary from the Academy Library. Violet bioluminescence indicated depth. Significant depth. They weren't on floor 1. They weren't even close to floor 1. Where are we? Mira whispered, her voice trembling. She was clutching a small enchanted pendant against her chest, her only tool, her only weapon. Tessa Grynn closed her eyes, her ambient mana sensing reaching outward like invisible tendrils probing the dungeon's structure. When she opened them again, her face was the color of chalk. Floor 7, she said quietly. We're on floor 7. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes funerals. Rook was the first to recover. The beastkin swordsman's ears flattened against his head, a predatory stress response, and his hand went to the hilt of his blade with the practiced fluidity of someone who had faced death before. And hadn't particularly enjoyed it but hadn't flinched either. That's impossible, he growled. The portals are calibrated to floors 1 through 3. Someone tampered with our entry point. Aldros, Kale said. The name left his mouth like poison. He didn't have proof. Not yet. But every instinct he'd honed during 16 years of surviving in a world that wanted him dead was screaming the same conclusion. Sarah Nightbloom looked at him with those striking violet eyes, the mark of her cursed bloodline. The Nightbloom heritage that carried both extraordinary healing power and a corrosive dark mana taint that slowly killed anyone she touched with her bare hands for too long. She didn't ask how he knew. She didn't need to. She had spent her entire life being feared and ostracized for something she couldn't control. She recognized the architecture of deliberate cruelty when she saw it. Then we move, she said firmly. Standing here debating who wants us dead doesn't change the fact that we need to find a way back to the upper floors. Every dungeon has ascending passages. We find one. We survive. We get out. They moved. Carefully. Quietly. Rook took point, his beastkin senses, enhanced hearing, thermal sight, instinctive threat detection, scanning the corridors ahead. Tessa walked beside him, her mana sensing acting as an early warning system for magical anomalies. Kale stayed in the middle with Mira and Jorin, while Sarah brought up the rear, her healing abilities ready for the inevitable moment when someone got hurt. The first attack came 17 minutes in. They rounded a corner into a wider chamber and found themselves face to face with a pack of abyssal stalkers, sleek, eyeless predators that hunted through vibration and mana scent. Their bodies covered in chitinous black plates that deflected most conventional magic. These were floor 7 creatures. Rank B threats. The kind of monsters that required coordinated teams of Class A and Class B students to handle safely. Squad 47 had no Class A students. No Class B students. They had a cursed healer, a stubborn swordsman, an enchantress who could reinforce objects, a boy who could make wind, a girl who could sense mana. And a hollow who wasn't supposed to have any abilities at all. The stalkers charged. What happened next was not strategy. It was not coordination. It was pure, desperate, ugly survival, the kind of fighting that doesn't make it into textbooks because it's too messy, too raw. Too honest about what combat really is when the people fighting haven't been trained to die gracefully. Rook met the first stalker head-on, his blade singing through the air with brutal efficiency. His swordsmanship was exceptional, Class A level, at least, and Kale understood immediately why this man had been demoted rather than expelled. You didn't expel someone this skilled. You buried them where they couldn't embarrass the people above them. Rook's blade carved through the first stalker's chitinous plating with a technique that spoke of years of real combat experience, not academy drills. But there were 9 of them. And Rook was one man. Kale didn't think. His body moved before his mind caught up, and the skills he'd been secretly accumulating surged to the surface like water breaking through a dam. Shadow's step carried him behind the second stalker in a blink of displaced darkness. Predator's reflexes slowed his perception of time just enough to read the creature's attack pattern, a lunging bite aimed at his throat. He twisted, and iron hide rippled across his forearm as he blocked the creature's jaws with his bare skin. The metallic sheen turning what should have been a severed limb into a bruising but survivable impact. Then he counterattacked. Mana sense guided his palm to the stalker's exposed underbelly, the one place where the chitin was thinnest, and he drove his fist forward with every ounce of strength he possessed. The creature shrieked and crumpled. His teammates stared. What the hell was that? Jiren breathed, his minor wind affinity flickering uselessly around his fingertips as he gaped at Kale. Later, Kale snapped. Fight now. Questions later. They fought. All of them. Sarah couldn't attack directly, her cursed touch was a liability in close combat, but she positioned herself behind Rook and kept him healed through wounds that would have dropped a normal person. 3 times over. Her violet mana flowing into his body and knitting torn muscle and shattered bone in real time. Mira, trembling and terrified, did the only thing she could, she reinforced Rook's sword. Layering enchantment after enchantment onto the blade until it glowed white-hot with compressed magical energy and cut through stalker chitin like paper. Jiren's weak wind affinity turned out to be surprisingly useful in an enclosed space. He couldn't generate force, but he could redirect the stalker's mana scent tracking, creating false trails that confused the creatures and bought precious seconds of misdirection. And Tessa, quiet, withdrawn, seemingly useless Tessa, became the squad's eyes, calling out creature positions, movement patterns, and incoming threats with a precision that bordered on precognitive. Her ambient mana sensing wasn't passive at all, Kale realized. In a high-mana environment like a dungeon, her ability became a 3-dimensional radar system that tracked every living thing within a 100-meter radius. They killed the stalkers. All 9 of them. And when the last creature fell, Squad 47 stood in the blood-soaked chamber, panting, wounded, and alive. But they weren't safe. They weren't even close to safe. Because the dungeon was still shifting around them, corridors rearranging, passages sealing, and the path upward, if one even existed, was being deliberately obscured. And the monsters were getting stronger. Over the next 6 hours, Squad 47 fought through Floor 7 like a unit that had been forged in fire and quenched in desperation. They encountered void weavers, spiders the size of carriages that spun webs of pure darkness capable of dissolving organic matter on contact. They fought marrow crawlers, skeletal serpents that burrowed through stone and attacked from below without warning. They survived a nest of shrieking hollow wraiths, incorporeal entities that fed on fear and could drive a person insane with a single scream if their mental defenses weren't strong enough. And through it all, Kale devoured. Every creature that fell to his hands gave up its skills. Minor ones, mostly, a voidweaver's thread sense that allowed him to detect vibrations through surfaces. A marrow crawler's tremor detection that gave him seismic awareness. A wraith's fragment of fear resistance that hardened his mind against psychological attacks. Individually, these skills were unremarkable. But Kale was accumulating them like a miser hoarding coins, and with each new acquisition, he felt the void inside him growing wider, deeper, more sophisticated. It was learning. Evolving. Adapting to the influx of devoured power with an efficiency that both thrilled and terrified him. His teammates noticed. Of course they noticed. You couldn't watch a boy who was supposed to have 0 talent suddenly deploy 5 different abilities in rapid succession without asking questions. But the questions didn't come. Not yet. Because when you're trapped on floor 7 of a death labyrinth with monsters closing in from every direction, you don't interrogate the one person who's keeping you alive. You shut up and you follow him and you pray that whatever impossible thing he's doing doesn't stop working before you reach the surface. Then they found the chamber. It was massive, a cathedral-sized cavern deep in the heart of floor 7, its ceiling lost in darkness. Its walls lined with pulsing veins of corrupted crimson mana that looked like the circulatory system of something ancient and malevolent. The air here was thick, almost liquid, saturated with a pressure that made breathing feel like drowning. Tessa's mana sensing spiked so hard she nearly collapsed, her face contorted in agony as she clutched her temples. "Something's in here," she gasped. "Something enormous. Rank A. At least rank A. It's everywhere. The mana signature fills the entire chamber. I can't even find its edges." The ground trembled. The walls shook. And from the darkness at the far end of the cavern, something emerged that made every member of Squad 47 understand, with perfect clarity, that they had just walked into the jaws of something that was never supposed to exist on this level of the dungeon. An abyssal chimera. Not the diluted, weakened specimens that the Academy occasionally used in controlled upper-floor exercises. A true chimera, a fusion-class abomination born from the merging of multiple abyssal creatures into a single, nightmarish entity. This one was massive, easily 30 feet tall, its body a grotesque patchwork of predatory anatomy. A lion's torso. A serpent's tail tipped with a fanged head of its own. Eagle's wings, but wrong, too many joints, too many feathers, each one razor-sharp and dripping with corrosive ichor. And 3 heads, a snarling wolf, a screeching hawk, and something that might have once been human but had been twisted beyond recognition into a howling, eyeless face of pure malice. Rank A, minimum. Possibly higher. And it could regenerate. Rook discovered that horrifying detail firsthand when he charged the creature in a desperate preemptive strike. His enchanted blade carving a massive gash across the chimera's lion torso, a wound that should have been crippling, should have severed muscle and tendon and brought the beast crashing to its knees. Instead, the wound sealed itself in seconds. Flesh knitted. Bone reformed. The chimera didn't even seem to register the damage. It swatted Rook aside like a toy, sending the beastkin swordsman hurtling across the cavern to slam into the far wall with a sickening crack that echoed through the chamber. Rook. Sarah sprinted toward him, her healing magic already blazing in her hands. 3 broken ribs. A fractured collarbone. Internal bleeding. She could fix it, she was extraordinarily talented, regardless of what her cursed bloodline made people think, but she needed time. Time they didn't have. The chimera turned its 3 heads toward the remaining squad members. Its wolf head snarled. Its hawk head shrieked. Its eyeless human head opened its mouth and released a sound that wasn't a roar, it was a psychic assault, a wave of concentrated dread that hit Kale's mind like a battering ram. Fear resistance absorbed most of the impact, but Mira and Jorin weren't so fortunate. Mira collapsed, clutching her head, screaming. Jorin stumbled backward, his eyes glazed, his weak wind affinity flickering and dying as panic overwhelmed his ability to concentrate. Kale stood alone against the abyssal chimera. He threw everything he had at it. Shadow Step let him dodge its crushing blows. Ironhide absorbed glancing strikes that would have shattered normal bone. Predator's reflexes kept him 1 heartbeat ahead of its attack patterns. But it wasn't enough. Every wound he inflicted, every cut, every impact, every desperate attack, healed within seconds. The creature's regeneration was absolute. Relentless. It didn't tire. It didn't weaken. It simply absorbed damage and returned it tenfold, its 3 heads coordinating attacks with a predatory intelligence that left no openings, no blind spots, no moments of vulnerability. Kale was losing. He could feel it in the burning of his muscles, the shortening of his breath, the narrowing of his options. His devoured skills were powerful individually, but they weren't designed to work together. They were fragments, stolen pieces of different puzzles jammed into the same box, functional but inefficient, each one operating independently rather than as part of a cohesive whole. And that's when the void whispered to him. Not in words. Not in language. In something deeper, a resonance, a vibration, a fundamental truth that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to the core of what he was. The void wasn't just a mouth. It wasn't just hunger. It was a forge. A crucible. A place where stolen things could be broken down, recombined, and reborn as something entirely new. Skill synthesis. The understanding hit him like lightning. He didn't learn it. He didn't discover it. He remembered it, as if this knowledge had always been there, buried beneath layers of ignorance and fear, waiting for the moment when desperation stripped away everything else and left only the raw, naked truth of what his power could become. He could merge skills. In the span of a heartbeat, a single, crystalline moment of absolute clarity amid the chaos and the blood and the roaring of the chimera, Kale reached into his void and seized two devoured skills simultaneously. Ironhide. Shadow Step. Two abilities that should have been incompatible, one made you solid and immovable, the other made you fluid and elusive. Defense and evasion. Anchor and wind. Opposites in every conceivable way. The void didn't care about opposites. The void consumed contradictions the way it consumed everything else, completely, absolutely, and without mercy. The two skills collided inside him. Shattered. Dissolved into their component essences, the fundamental magical principles that defined what they were. And from the fragments, something new was born. Something that had never existed before in the entire history of the Etherian continent. Something that made the void pulse with satisfaction, like a heart finding its rhythm for the first time. Phantom armor. Kale felt it settle into his body like a second skin, no, like a second existence. His physical form shimmered, flickered, and then shifted into a state that defied classification. He was solid and intangible simultaneously. Present and absent. There and not there. His body maintained its defensive hardness, the metallic resilience of Ironhide, but existed in a phase-shifted state that allowed physical and magical attacks to pass through him like light. Through glass. He could choose, moment by moment, what to be solid against and what to be ghost against. Perfect defense. Perfect evasion. Merged into a single, seamless, terrifyingly elegant ability. The chimera's hawk head lunged, a strike fast enough to break the sound barrier, and its beak passed through Kale's chest as if he were made of smoke. The wolf head followed with a crushing bite aimed at his legs, and its jaws snapped shut on nothing but flickering afterimage. The serpent tail whipped around in a sweeping arc that should have cut him in half, and it sliced through empty air where a solid boy had stood a millisecond before. And then Kale attacked. He materialized his fist at the exact moment of impact, shifting from phantom to solid in the space between heartbeats, and drove his palm into the chimera's wolf head with the full concentrated force of Ironhide's metallic density compressed into a single point of contact. The skull cracked. The creature staggered. And for the first time since the battle began, the chimera felt pain. It screamed. All three heads, simultaneously, a sound that shook the cavern and sent cracks racing across the ceiling. But the regeneration kicked in immediately, bone reforming, flesh knitting, damage reversing at a cellular level. That was fine. Kale wasn't trying to outdamage the regeneration anymore. He was trying to reach the source. Phantom armor carried him through the chimera's defenses like a ghost through walls. He phased through its slashing claws, its snapping jaws, its whipping tail. He flickered in and out of tangibility with an instinct that felt less like a learned skill and more like breathing, natural, effortless, inevitable. Each time he materialized, he struck. Each strike drove him deeper into the creature's guard, closer to its core, closer to the pulsing nexus of dark mana that powered its regeneration. He found it in the center of the creature's chest, a swirling knot of crimson and black energy, dense as a collapsed star, radiating the unmistakable signature of a high-tier abyssal skill. Adaptive regeneration. The ability to analyze incoming damage and restructure cellular composition in real time to become progressively more resistant to whatever was hurting it. Not just healing, evolution. The chimera wasn't just recovering from wounds. It was learning from them. Becoming stronger. Becoming harder to kill with every passing second. Kale plunged his hand into the creature's chest. The void opened wide. The chimera thrashed. Its three heads screamed in a cacophony of agony and rage and something that sounded almost like despair, the sound of a creature feeling its very essence being ripped away. Its core skill unraveling like thread from a spool. Crimson mana poured from the wound, not outward but inward, into Kale's palm, into his arm, into the bottomless hunger that sat where his empty soul crystal waited with infinite patience. Adaptive regeneration. Skill devoured. Integration complete. The chimera collapsed. Its body, stripped of the regeneration that had sustained it, began to decompose at an accelerated rate, Years of accumulated abyssal corruption catching up in seconds, flesh rotting, bone crumbling. 3 heads falling silent one by one as the thing that had been unkillable moments ago dissolved into a pool of black ichor and silence. Kale stood in the center of the cavern, breathing hard, his phantom armor flickering and fading as the adrenaline drained from his system. He looked down at his hands. They were trembling. Not from exhaustion, from something far more primal. He could feel the adaptive regeneration settling into his void, integrating with his existing skills, whispering promises of near immortality. A wound on his forearm, a gash he'd taken early in the fight, sealed itself as he watched, the flesh knitting with a speed and precision that made his stomach turn. This was power beyond anything he'd imagined. Power that could reshape him at a fundamental level. Power that terrified him. Kale. Rook's voice. The beastkin swordsman was on his feet, barely, leaning heavily on Sarah, his injury stabilized but far from healed. He was staring at Kale with an expression that Kale had never seen directed at himself before. Not fear. Not suspicion. Not contempt. Respect. What are you? Rook asked quietly. Kale didn't answer. Because he didn't know. And he was beginning to suspect that knowing might be worse than ignorance. They found an ascending passage behind the chimera's chamber, a narrow, spiraling staircase carved into the stone that led upward through the dungeon's shifting architecture. Tessa confirmed the route with her mana sensing, and the squad began the long, exhausting climb toward the surface. They moved in silence, each member processing the impossible things they had witnessed in their own way. Mira kept glancing at Kale with wide, unreadable eyes. Jorin wouldn't look at him at all. Rook walked beside him with the easy, watchful calm of a warrior who had decided to reserve judgment. And Sarah stayed close, closer than necessary, her violet eyes carrying a weight that suggested she understood something about Kale's power that even he hadn't fully grasped yet. It was during the climb that Kale saw the body. A student from another squad, not one of theirs, someone Kale didn't recognize, lay crumpled on a landing between floors, half hidden behind a collapsed section of wall. The uniform was torn. The injuries were severe, claw marks, burns, the unmistakable damage of a monster attack. But the student was alive. Barely. Shallow, ragged breathing. A faint pulse visible in the exposed throat. Kale knelt beside the fallen student, instinctively reaching out to check for vital signs. His hand touched the student's exposed wrist. The void surged. Not by choice. Not by decision. Not by any conscious act of will. The hunger inside Kale moved on its own, a reflexive, predatory response triggered by contact with a weakened, vulnerable source of skill-bearing mana. Before Kale could react, before he could pull away, before he could even understand what was happening, the void reached through his palm and devoured. The student's skill, a minor but functional ability called spark generation, the capacity to produce small bursts of electrical energy, unraveled from the fallen boy's soul and flowed into Kale's. Void like water into a drain. Quick. Silent. Complete. The student's breathing changed. Something intangible left his body, a dimming, a reduction, a subtle but irreversible diminishment that Kale felt in his bones with nauseating clarity. The boy's soul crystal, wherever it sat inside his unconscious body, had just become a little emptier. A little darker. A little more hollow. Kale yanked his hand away as if he'd touched molten iron. He staggered backward, his breath catching, his stomach heaving. The devoured skill settled into his void with casual indifference, just another drop in an expanding ocean. But this drop was different. This drop was stolen. Not from a monster. Not from a dying beast in a survival trial. From a person. An unconscious, helpless, defenseless human being who had not consented, who had not even been awake to know what was happening to them. Kale stared at his hand. The same hand that had slain an abyssal chimera. The same hand that had discovered skill synthesis. The same hand that held the power to devour anything and everything in his path. The hand of a weapon. The hand of a predator. The hand of something that the world might have been right to fear all along. Kale. Sarah's voice, soft with concern. She was watching him. She had seen him touch the student. She had seen him recoil. She didn't know what had happened, not exactly, But her healer's intuition told her that something had just broken inside the boy she was beginning to consider a friend. "I'm fine," he lied. The words tasted like ash. They emerged from the dungeon 2 hours later, battered, bloodied, and alive against every probability that Weisstein Aldros had carefully stacked against them. The surface was chaos. Emergency healers rushed between injured students. Instructors barked orders. Several squads had been extracted early after suffering casualties on floors 3 and 4. No one had been sent to floor 7. No one was supposed to have been anywhere near floor 7. And yet here was Squad 47, walking out of the abyssal labyrinth's deepest accessible levels as if they'd simply taken an unpleasant stroll. The examiners stared. The healers stared. The other students, battered and exhausted from their own comparatively tame experiences on the upper floors, turned and stared with expressions that ranged from disbelief to suspicion to something uncomfortably close to awe. But one pair of eyes burned hotter than all the others. Dorian Velcrest stood at the edge of the extraction zone, his elite Class S squad arrayed behind him like a royal guard. Every one of them pristine and barely scratched from their own carefully managed expedition. His squad had been routed through Floor 3, the standard path for high-rank students, designed to challenge without truly endangering the Academy's most valuable investments. They had performed flawlessly, as expected. They had encountered Kale's squad briefly in the dungeon depths, during a corridor overlap caused by the labyrinth's shifting architecture, and in that brief, accidental encounter, Dorian had witnessed something that now burned behind his crimson eyes like molten steel behind glass. He had seen Kale fight. He had seen the phantom armor. He had seen a boy ranked dead last in the Academy deploy abilities that shouldn't exist, abilities that made Dorian's own prodigious fire magic look pedestrian by comparison. And the expression on Dorian Velcrest's aristocratic face wasn't anger. It wasn't contempt. It wasn't even jealousy, though jealousy was certainly part of it, swimming beneath the surface like a shark beneath still water. It was obsession. The kind of obsession that doesn't fade. The kind that doesn't settle for rivalry. The kind that demands resolution, through dominance, through destruction. Through whatever means necessary to restore the natural order of a world where Dorian Velcrest was supposed to be the brightest star and no one, certainly not a filthy, talentless, impossible hollow from the gutters, was supposed to outshine him. "Enjoy your miracle, Ashbourne," Dorian murmured, so quietly that only the wind heard him. "It won't happen twice." Kale didn't hear the words. He was too busy trying not to look at his own hands. Too busy feeling the weight of a stolen skill that sat in his void like a stone in his stomach. Too busy remembering the way the unconscious student's breathing had changed, that subtle, irreversible diminishment, and wondering if the world had been right about him all along. He was a hollow. A void. An emptiness that consumed. And for the first time since his power awakened, Kale Ashbourne was afraid, not of the monsters, not of the dungeon, not of the enemies who wanted him dead. He was afraid of himself.